Hey everyone, my name is Jeffery Newbury. I'm a photographer that has photographed Trek personalities over the years, primarily for Entertainment Weekly and a personal project with Patrick Stewart. You are listening to Trek Untold.
Hello and welcome back to Trek Untold, a Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. I am very excited to tell you about who this week's guest is, but before we get to that, I actually want to give a quick shout out to something else. Just recently, I appeared on the podcast of one of my Patreon supporters named Braden, and he has a show called The Epicurean Unicorn, which, as you can kind of tell from the name, has very little to do with Star Trek. However, Braden is a huge Trekkie, and wherever he finds ways to marry the two things together, he does so excellently. And in fact, he has had other Star Trek guests on previously, but that's a plug for a different episode here. But on a recent episode of The Epicurean Unicorn, I showed up there to talk to Braden all about my time as a New York food critic. Because, believe it or not, yes, for a brief shining time, I actually was a food critic in New York City. The episode has some really fun stories I don't normally get to talk about as much because, again, that is in the world of food, and this show is so very much Star Trek-centric. But if you want to hear a different side of me and learn about some food and also support one of our fellow patrons and a Trek Untold lover, go ahead and check out that episode of The Epicurean Unicorn, which I'm going to have a link for, by the way, in the show notes to make sure you don't miss out on it. It was a lot of fun to do. Braden is an excellent host. I think you guys are going to really enjoy it, and it's also worth checking out, too, just to see the other members of the Star Trek podcasting community who've dropped by and talk about food with him. But as for this week's episode of Trek Untold, today is a really fun one because, again, I'm talking to someone who is a little bit outside of the typical world of Star Trek. Our guest on this week's episode is Jeffery Newbury, and Jeffery is a photographer. And in terms of the world of Star Trek, we really don't see a lot of photographers running around canonically in the universe taking photos of things. And really, the only time I can think of it off the top of my head would be that one scene at the beginning of Star Trek Generations. But photography, and in particular still photography, is a big part of what happens beyond just the filming of the shows and beyond just the universe of Star Trek. And Jeffrey's connection to Star Trek is actually quite a deep one, because as we're going to learn in this episode, not only was Jeffrey a super hardcore Trekkie growing up, he still is one to this day. And that love of Trek actually in some ways very early on in his career helped kind of direct him towards the path of photography. Jeffrey's connection to Star Trek actually comes a little bit later on in his career, but to kind of tell you a little about who he is first, Jeffrey is a well-known, highly recognized, and excellently regarded photographer who has shot all sorts of A-list celebrities, award-winning musicians, innovative CEOs, and so much more in between. His portfolio ranges from some true luminaries and legends in these many different industries, and its paths eventually did cross with Star Trek thanks to his magazine work. Jeffrey has had the opportunity to work with members of the original cast, the TNG cast, DS9, and Voyager to take pictures of them for various magazine shoots. In fact, certain magazines he shot for, he was pretty much the only photographer doing those things, so they essentially are his issues of photography. And Jeffrey's work is absolutely stunning. You're going to see some photos of it in the video version, and if you're listening to the audio version, I do recommend you check out my social media pages to take a look at some of the different photos that we're going to be talking about today, because man, they are absolutely worth taking a look at. So in this episode, we're going to talk to Jeffrey not only about his time on Star Trek and working with these various Star Trek actors, but also his road to photography, the tips and tools of the trade that he does to make his photos look the way they do, and really take a deep examination into some of these particular Star Trek photos, and get a chance to chat again, just like I did on the Epicurean Unicorn, about things that I don't normally get to talk to on this show about. Photography is one of my passions, and it's really fun to be able to chat with somebody like Jeffrey who is so many levels above me, and I imagine for a lot of amateur photographers out there who are listening to this podcast, you're going to be picking up a lot of interesting things that you maybe never considered for your photography that I think you can use immediately for the next time you have a photo shoot to do. I should make a quick note, though, for anybody who is watching the video version of this episode, we do have a little bit of connectivity issues because Jeffrey is currently living out in Arizona. So yeah, internet was not so great, so if you're watching it, basically the first half is pretty decent, and by the time we unfortunately get into the Star Trek talk, the video kind of turns into a little bit of a stop-motion thing. It's not so great, but I do my best to cover it up with as many photos of his work as I can, so hopefully it won't be too noticeable. The audio, of course, is fine, so really no worries there for anybody who's just listening to the audio version, or if you're watching this on YouTube and you're just kind of looking at it in the background, shouldn't bother you at all. There's really nothing I can do to fix it, it just is what it is. But either way, I hope you guys enjoyed this really fun and very interesting chat with photographer Jeffery Newbury as we take a true deep dive into the work he does and how it relates to the world of Star Trek. But before we start talking to this week's guest, I want to remind you guys to make sure you are following Trek Untold on all forms of social media. You can check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all at Trek Untold, and that's one word, Trek Untold, no spaces in between. That's the best way to stay up to date on who our guests are for the week, learn all about them before the show begins, and check out all the random memes I post because yeah, I do a lot of that too. If you're in a position to financially support the show, please consider becoming a Patreon member. Head over to patreon.com/trekuntold to see all the different ways you can help financially at different contribution levels. Some of the perks include early access to the episodes, having the chance to ask guests questions, and hopefully some more stuff that I'm going to figure out pretty soon. It is easily the best way to directly connect with me, as well as to meet other fans of this show. If you're looking to buy some Trek Untold merchandise, don't worry, that's going to be coming very soon. If you prefer to check out the video version of this podcast, head over to youtube.com/nerdnewstoday, where every Sunday I post these episodes in video format, which includes a lot of images and video from the guests that we're talking to. But the most important thing you can do to help support this show is please leave us ratings and reviews if you're checking us out on iTunes, on Spotify, or other audio platforms that allow you to leave reviews and ratings, or by subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as giving our Trek Untold videos thumbs up, likes, and comments. All these interactions help push our podcast to the very top of these different platforms to make sure more Star Trek fans can find us. It costs you nothing to do other than a few moments of your time, so please, if you haven't done that already, consider doing so. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and beam up this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. And welcome back to Trek Untold, and now joining us on the other side of the screen, all the way in lovely Arizona, much nicer view than I've got here in New York, we've got photographer extraordinaire, Mr. Jeffery Newbury. Jeffrey, how's it going today?
Good, thank you. Excellent.
Thank you so much for joining us here, and we have many things to discuss, as I always do in this show, but I'd like to kind of kick things off by asking you the same question I ask all my guests, and that's, Jeffrey, what is your earliest memory of Star Trek?
Oh, wow. I didn't expect that. Actually, I grew up on a farm in northern Wisconsin, and so the television was almost like a god, because that farm was isolated, very small dairy farm, and Star Trek was on, and that was always one of my favorite things to watch, maybe besides Man from U.N.C.L.E., Wild Wild West, you know what I'm saying? That was that whole time. But Star Trek, of course, just like Lost in Space was on back then too. I would make sure I was in front of that television. I was probably like 10, so that's it. That's when I started watching Star Trek.
I know we're kind of jumping around here, but we're talking about you being a photographer, as we're going to discuss in this interview. And one thing I've always noticed at Star Trek is I don't really see too many photographers. I can't really think of too much photography in the future. I don't know what's up with that. Have you ever noticed that in Star Trek?
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up because one of my favorite scenes in 2001: Space Odyssey is when that photographer comes in and when they're out going up to the moon. Remember that scene?
Yep.
And he's got this little box, right? And back then, of course, when that movie came out, I mean, it was like what's that little box? Now we got the iPhone,
I'm just saying, by the 24th century, I guarantee you Leica will still be around. They'll still be making cameras.
Oh, 100%. Are you kidding? They, I cannot wait for the new generation of cameras. Even when the first iPhone came out, speaking of cameras really quick, I knew that this is the beginning of something really special, in photography. And the 13 right now doing what it's doing, all the cameras have always done a lot of progressive imagery, but when you put it, I did a shoot last night with the iPhone for someone that wanted some new headshots. I just used my iPhone and they came out fantastic. It's amazing, you can use it to where you can use any camera now and manipulate everything to make it work, But outside of that, if I'm getting off on a random.
Well, that's what we do here. We're going to be jumping all over the place, but let me try and get us back on track for a few minutes. We'll see how it goes. And I'd like to get the secret origin story of Jeffery Newbury. So I'd like to know where you grew up, who your parents were, and what little Jeffrey wanted to be when he got older.
Well, I think it goes hand in hand with my last story about watching Star Trek. I was on this little dairy farm in northern Wisconsin, Phillips, Wisconsin. My mom is still there. The farm is still there. It's not a working farm anymore. It's 80 acres, and that whole northern Wisconsin area now has been taken up by corporate farming. There's only one or two major milk producers up there, and if they don't own the land, they rent it. And that's what my family still does, is now rent to the corporate farmer, right? but the house is still there, and I'm staying there this summer. I go back every summer. I jump in that little river that I jumped in when I was a kid, the Little Elk, you know. And but the inspiration of television and Star Trek for me was really, I think that was the seed, you know. I mean, even then I was writing to Hollywood to get headshots from my favorite actors, and they would come in the mail. They'd come in that mailbox out there on Highway D, you know, and I had them up in my bedroom. And I cannot remember getting Star Trek, actually, in all honesty. I mean, I'm surprised I didn't, but I do remember having all the other ones, like Man from U.N.C.L.E. and stuff. And then, of course, the Beatles came along, and the Beatles kind of took over them, you know. I was getting all the Beatles stuff. But so my mom, hardworking woman, basically raising a bunch of boys. You know, I'm the oldest. She's the one who basically raised us, besides my grandparents, which is where the farm thing comes in. I never even had to talk about that before, so it's kind of interesting to think about it.
It's one thing to look at the past, because you really can't even tell what's going on in the future, right? But I think it actually kind of ties in with you, because you're talking about getting these headshots from Hollywood, and here we are now, your career much later on, you're taking headshots of Hollywood people.
No, and that's the weird thing about it, right? Or the amazing thing about it is that, trying to make a long story short, is I left the farm when I was 12 years old. I'm not going to go into all the dramas and all the family stuff. I was brought out to the state of Washington, and then at 16, I was brought up to Alaska, of all things, right? And when I was up in Alaska, as much as including being on the dairy farm, I mean, it's a very challenging environment, you know, especially for someone like me, because I think more urban. I think from even being from the farm and from Alaska, I'm more of an urban type person, or cosmopolitan. I'm not sure how you would describe that. I like forward-thinking people. I love technology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And it was when I was in high school up in Ketchikan, I discovered the camera, you know, I mean, in truth. And I was a senior. And then I went back to Wisconsin, of all places, for different reasons, after high school, actually to see my dad. And I ended up staying there in the dead of winter, working on a cranberry farm to make ends meet. And I'm like, I can't do this for much longer, man. It's 40 below zero, and et cetera, right? So the only place to get an education in photography in 1973 was Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as far as staying in Wisconsin. And that's where I went. And I got my first degree in photography from Wisconsin. And I went back to Alaska and worked a while. And then I went back to Southern Illinois and got my BFA in photography. And then I ended up in San Francisco right after that, because San Francisco was a known hub of fine art photographers. That was just that reputation back then. And so was New York, of course, and LA, but they didn't attract me. I wanted to go to San Francisco. And that's where I ended up. And I was there up until I moved here 2 years ago for, 40 years, you know. I still go back and forth. But yeah, I ended up collecting headshots as a kid. And I've shot a zillion of them myself now in Hollywood, you know.
So you mentioned that you were going to school for fine arts photography, but at what point did you start doing more commercial stuff? I mean, was your intention to do more commercial stuff, or did you want to do the fine arts?
No, I thought good question. I thought my intent was to be a fine art photographer. You know, I did my I came to San Francisco to do my graduate work, which is where I went at San Francisco State, my master's. Of course, that was all fine art, whatever subject or, you know, direction you take, your thesis. But while I'm in graduate school, my buddy who didn't do graduate school, and we both moved out from Southern Illinois, he wanted to be a commercial photographer. And so he was assisting commercial photographers in San Francisco, right? And I was watching him do that, you know, and it didn't really attract me. You know, as a matter of fact, I only assisted one photographer in my whole life. And that was through my buddy Mark. because he goes, we need somebody else. Can you come here and be the second assistant? And I'm like watching this guy photograph toys from New York, you know?
Of course.
And I'm like, this guy was flown out and he's getting paid how much to photograph these toys, you know? And I was flat ass broke. You know, I've been broke for a decade going through colleges, right? And Mark goes, I heard that Macy's is hiring. He just told me that. And I go, okay. I grab, what am I having here? I grabbed these big prints I was doing for my thesis. And my thesis back then in graduate school was, my instructor called it eroticism. I didn't think of it as eroticism at all. I still don't. I've been looking at all my stuff here since the 2 years I've been back. That's what I'm actually doing here, is going through my archives. But I grabbed these prints, I put them in a box, I go down to Macy's, didn't even make an appointment. I didn't know anything about that. And I want to see the art director. The art director, yeah, come on in. I'm bringing out these prints and he's looking at these prints. He's like, wow, you're really good. He goes, but I can't hire you. And I go, why not? He's like, we photograph shoes and clothes and jewelry and you know, he goes, if you bring in something that I can hire you from, a photograph, and it's good as these are, I'll give you a job, right? And lo and behold, I had somebody want me to photograph just by, you know, however, somebody, my neighbor, something wanted me to photograph a ring for them, a ring. And I took a leaf and I floated it, made it float in this little pond, and I put this leaf on it. And I made a little platform of well, anyway, the sculptural thing. And I put this ring on there and I shot it. And I'm like, wow, I got one shot. Go down to Macy's. His name was Brian. I go down to Macy's. It's this 1 4x5 chrome. And I'm like, what do you think? And he goes, Beth, give Jeffery Newbury the next 2 pages of jewelry. Right? And that's the way it started. But I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea about stylists. I had no idea about assistants, you know, the whole thing. I was completely green. And it took me, I mean, the stress from that job alone, you know, because I had to figure out how to even light a bunch of jewelry, you know, it was crazy. That's how I got my start in commercial work.
All right.
And
yeah, well.
the money was the key, though, in all honesty. But as things progressed more, I was starting to do, I hit the magazines up, you know, because I was even San Francisco Magazine was my first shoot for a commercial shoot for a magazine. And I'm looking at this magazine, I'm like, wow, this is they're using cool photographers, you know? And I did an infrared black and white shot for a girl with a wine glass, you know, glowing away in the shadows, you know? And I just, okay, I thought that's what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna make art for my clients, you know? But what does happen as you get more successful, you get an agent. Agents are about money, which is good and bad. Before you know it, you're shooting a lot of stuff you don't even want to photograph. You know, you're a machine, you know, you become a machine, really. And I think it happens to everyone. And you have to, I had a hard time at times photographing just jeans or something, you know, over and over again every day. And they were paying me so much money.
You wanted to challenge yourself, basically.
It was a challenge. Yeah. So that's how that happened.
Well, so looking ahead a little bit, you know, we're talking about now you're coming from the fine arts world. Now you're doing some product shots. You're doing some commercial photography. Along this road, how does Jeffery Newbury find his way into now working for magazines, taking photos of celebrities, musicians? I mean, where does that road begin?
Good question. It happened quite a while ago. That was in the mid 80s. You know, it didn't take too long for some odd reason. I mean, I was a very hard worker. I still am. I mean, if I wasn't making a photograph of something every day, something was wrong, you know. And it didn't have to be for someone else. You know, I had to be in the dark room all the time. I love the dark room. I don't have a dark room at the moment. I'm thoroughly engrossed in digital and stuff now, you know. But I was shooting for San Francisco magazine. Then the Examiner hires me in San Francisco. And then it just kept snowballing. I shot for Macworld magazine a ton, PC World magazine. They were all in San Francisco. I didn't have to go anywhere. They were all there, right? They're not there anymore, And so it was a perfect time for me to jump into it. And especially the computer magazines, and I didn't even know anything about computers. They're like, we want you to make a photograph about the files for the Mac. I'm like, well, what's files, right? And I wish I had some of the shit here, but it's kind of like, I'm like, files, okay, and so if I could shoot infrared film, if I could shoot grain, if I could shoot shadows, and I just kept on doing that kind of stuff. And I would do illustrated photography for these ideas, and that's how I got my fine art satisfaction.
Yeah, you're very much combining those two things together.
Yeah. And that's just who I am. It's like even the shoot last night with the iPhone turned out very arty, for lack of a better description, I really don't like that word that much, but that's kind of how you have to describe it sometimes, especially when it's done for a purpose that the end product's going to be used commercially,
Well, let's talk about what your first, let's say, we're talking about the headshots, you're talking about taking some photos with celebrities. Let's talk about maybe what the very first time was for you when you had to work with a celebrity. I mean, tell us who that was, if you remember, and were you intimidated? Was it daunting? What was that experience like?
Intimidated a lot by celebrities, in all honesty. Because I think it becomes from my childhood, because celebrities to me were in that magic box in the living room that was in California. I'm in northern Wisconsin, freezing my ass off as a little boy, watching my grandfather milk cows. I can remember some, like for example, Tom Waits. It was like in the late 80s. Now I'm sure I shot a few notables before that. Oh, Doug Tompkins of the Street. I remember when I got that shoot from San Francisco magazine. It was one of my first real portrait shoots. And that's actually probably a very early portrait celebrity. And he wasn't really a celebrity, but he actually is a celebrity. You know what I'm saying? He's not a television celebrity. I mean, the guy started with Spree, and others. But I developed that film. I shot one roll of film at a Spree in San Francisco, went back to my house, my flat in Noe Valley, and developed that roll of film myself, a color roll, because I didn't even have the money to bring it to a lab, So that's kind of an earliest one for kind of some kind of a notable person, but somebody that a lot of people would know about just off cuff would be somebody like Tom Waits, musician. And I remember when that shoot came in and somebody calls me up and goes, hey, we heard you're doing this and that, and you want to go shoot Tom Waits? He's doing a video down on Broadway. We need somebody there for 2 days behind the scenes. And I'm like, great, I love Tom Waits, but here's Tom Waits sitting next to me, and it is his voice, and talking to me. And I'm just like, I was in awe about the guy. I mean, he's just an amazing individual, but, as time goes on, you get really used to being around really dynamic, creative people, and that's what a lot of celebrities are. What I like about, say, Los Angeles is that it's very professional for the most part. You get somebody like Patrick Stewart walking in front of you, or Keanu Reeves or whatever, and you could just tell them, and it's just instant. It's not like going to, say, this woman I photographed last night. She's young too. She'd never really been photographed very much, but she needs these commercial shots here in Tucson, and someone like that is, you have to get them, you have to mold them into places.
Yeah, direct them a little bit more.
A lot of direction. Not that I don't direct my actors, because they love being directed. It's like, and that was a learning thing too. You can almost tell them anything, and most of them will do almost anything you ask. A lot of them will cut it at certain points.
Well, that kind of leads me to a question I had, in fact, on that topic, which would be, we're going to talk about a lot of the folks you've worked with, and I'm just going to name a few names just so our listeners and our audience knows, but you mentioned Tom Waits. There's Tupac, you work with Carlos Santana, Leonard Cohen, Rogers Water, Limp Bizkit. This is, a lot of pretty big luminaries in the music world, not even talking about actors yet. But, I'd
Yeah.
like to know how much of your job as a photographer doing these portraits is, I don't want to say babysitting or directing necessarily, but, all these people have very different personalities and they all react to things very differently. So, how much of your job is just being able to be a photographer and doing what you want to do versus how much of it is your job to then make them become moldable to what you want to do and make them interact and work with you?
They go hand in hand. Just, and it's interesting you asking that because it makes me reflect on how I do want to photograph people. And that changes, I mean, I even look at my work right now and I look at all the stuff I've done over the decades, and it's like I mentioned earlier, that's why I'm here in Tucson, which with the house that I got working here is to go through my archives, I mean, and I'm still astounded, but I got them sitting right here. You can't see them, but I got zillions of photographs sitting here, things that I photographed back in, I mean, you go, this guy's a screenwriter from, I'm not sure it was the X-Files, maybe. And here, I'm going to use this one. I didn't mean to, but if I posed him like that, right? This guy's not going to do that for me, but unless you ask him to. But babysitting, you come up, you mentioned Limp Bizkit. Fred Durst is that guy. Or Metallica, let's say Metallica. When I was shooting Metallica, it's like you got the camera and, they look like they're going to F you up, right? These guys, they got, no, really, they're looking at you like, I'm going to kill you, that's their look. But as photographer, you're like, okay, yeah. Every shot is where they look like they're going to beat you up, Where Tupac, I worked with him so that he could not only get his personality out. I always look for the personality, but I knew he needed some molding. And I'm not saying because Tupac, I'm not sure if you know about the museum show right now in LA. That about 2/3 of the work in that museum is mine, right?
Yeah.
And but the guy was becoming an actor, and I could tell he liked to be told kind of how to look, but then he would take it over, next thing you know, he'd be doing something after you told him to do one other thing or to look a certain way. And then he just took it and then kind of brought it into his life, and that was something with Pac where versus say Metallica was like, they're going to stand there and they're going to go, and that's just what they're going to do. Yeah. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not, but it's people are different every time you get someone in front of your camera. And that's part of not only a challenge, but that's what inspires me. I mean, I feel very privileged to be a photographer. I've been around the world photographing just amazing people in amazing places, and it's made me see the world different, without that, I'm not sure what kind of person I would have been,
I want to kind of follow up on that idea a little bit more and kind of explore a little bit further before we start jumping into our Star
Sure.
Trek talk here.
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of ask you about, we're talking about now personality of the photography, let's say, the personality of the photos. So, you are from the artistic photo background, so you're kind of goal-minded. Something that's a bit more high art, more concept. But you're also shooting for a client, and the client has things they want you to do. They have something in mind, I assume. So I'd like to know basically, can you balance that? Are you able to balance basically what you want to do and what the client is telling you to do, and then also what the subject is going to let you do? How do you make this kind of perfect marriage to make all the pieces come together?
Man, that's complex.
That's what we do here. This isn't just a Star Trek show. We dig.
And it's all true. Everything you said has to happen to make the photograph. I mean, great perception on your part. I mean, even photographers sometimes don't even understand that, I think. I mean, I'm serious, and those are things that I'm going to go back to my undergraduate degree really quick. I had an amazing instructor, David Gilmore was his name. Still, he's not teaching anymore. and he did teach portrait class. And the reason I want to bring that up, and it's actually even correlates with, say, the file system photograph I was talking about with Macworld. There's a place for me when I bring my camera up, and I'm going to photograph you right now, right? Where I can start to feel it. You can just feel it, you know. Similar with last night when I was doing the iPhone portraits. And that place that I talk about feeling it is really something that I was always searching for. And I discovered it in portrait class through David. Just that guy never gave me an A. It was always an A minus. He's one of those guys, right?
I had one of those.
Like, damn it. Yeah, right. But he knew that he had to do that to you, you know. And it was like, but back then when you're like 22 years old or whatever you are, you're just like, but you know what, man? I finally started understanding what a portrait was about 2/3 of the way into that semester. To me, that understanding was that I kind of like, it was kind of, once again, it was a feeling. It was like I was able to get this feeling from this person that would allow them to come out to the camera more, you know, whether I had to, like you used the word babysitting, whether I had to use some kind of like conversation, get down on my belly and shoot up on them to get them, you know, just different techniques almost to kind of get them at ease, you know. A lot of people, even actors actually, don't like still photography. You know, they'd rather be in front of a moving camera, you know, I mean, that way they don't have to sit there and like this, you know. The confidence you have to bring into a shoot when you're hired, and I kept reminding myself that, especially in the earlier years, that they're looking at my photographs, they hired me from my photographs, and I'm going to give them what they see in their photographs. The greatest challenge was when they would actually, I'd get a client and they're like, well, we don't want that. They would say that to you. I'm like, well, what do you want? Well, we want something like this. And you look at what they want and it's garbage, you know, but they want you to do it. Yeah, but they want you to do it, you know? And I'm like, that's when it got really hard. It got really hard then, you know? And so I tried to be more sensitive to, I don't think I've ever, well, no, I have. I've turned down a few jobs, you know, but my personal integrity is I really don't turn down jobs, you know. I'll do 3 shoots a day and get 5 hours of sleep at night or whatever, you know. That's back in the heyday, as I say. That's when I was, you know, super, super busy all the time. In all honesty, you know, between the recession, between .com going down in San Francisco, the recession, and now COVID, it's been a little bit lean, you know, it's leaned out. But at my age and what I want to do right now with photography, and whether it's an NFT site, the Cochran Shapiro site, and that's not stopping. I'm building and building and building. I just need, I need a little bit of a team around me right now, but I'm still a one-man show because I want my archives to be expanded into how I've always really envisioned them. You know, you look at, say, one person, Tom Waits. I've shot Tom 3 times over the years. I have right here, can you see this by any chance?
Yeah, yep.
That box, that's the Trek box. All this film in here is all the Trek shoots, right? This one's Trek. Now, Tom Waits, I have maybe a stack of film from 3 shoots about this much. I'm not sure how many images that would be, but I would say 1,500 images, maybe more. You know, and then you start to get down to the white table and you start editing, like, oh my God, look at that image. Oh my God, look at that one. Before you know it, you got a whole damn gallery, right? And that's what I'm doing though now. I love it. And that's the problem when you get really busy. You have your assistants slide up the film back in the day when it's all film, goes out to the client, comes back to the client, and you put it in the shelf. You don't even look at it. You just shoot the damn thing, you know? And now I'm looking at all my stuff for really the first time. I mean, I'm just looking at what I've done, you know? And then I have 2 daughters, you know, and I put everything into a trust. And believe me, man, They both know they don't want to deal with this stack of stuff I got when I exit. So
I feel your pain. I got a
I'm
story
trying
about that.
to-
I'll tell you off air.
So it's kind of like, man, I'm trying to get through a lot of this so that they don't have to do it, make some money from it. The Tupac exhibit's great, things like that. That's, but bringing a shoot together through all these different angles that you talked about, it can be a challenge sometimes. But the place I go to, just as I mentioned, is trying to make the best photograph I can make, within the situation. And I don't care if that's a pair of jeans for Levi's to making a portrait of, a Star Trek actor, but it's still a learning experience. It really is. I mean, photography's always been like that.
Trek Untold will return momentarily.
Trek Untold is brought to you by Triple Fiction Productions. Triple Fiction Productions produces affordable and unique 3D printed Trek-inspired products from the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the movies. Ranging from prop replicas to use in a fan film or cosplay, to accessories or playsets for figures in all different sizes, Triple Fiction Productions has got you covered. Past pieces for toys have included large centerpieces like 10 Forward from the Enterprise D, shuttlecrafts complete with working lights, and the Voyager Bridge, with smaller pieces including Borg alcoves, the Genesis device, and the dreaded arch-enemy of Worf, barrels. All highly detailed products are 3D printed and hand-painted in the USA, with new items added all the time, while simultaneously improving their printing quality based on fan feedback. To learn more about their products, visit triple-fictionproductions.net or visit them on Facebook at facebook.com/triplefictionproductions. Want to get 10% off your next purchase? Use code UNTOLD10 at checkout to receive this discount. Not applicable during sales or clearance events. That's code UNTOLD10 to get 10% off action figure dioramas, accessories, and prop replicas. Triple Fiction Productions, taking Star Trek where no 3D printer has gone before.
Hey, I'm Licia Nav, aka Ensign Sonia Gomez from Star Trek TNG, and now Captain Sonia Gomez on lower decks with her own ship, the Archimedes. Yay! I finally got a promotion after 25 years. So anyway, I'm here to talk about drivebydogooders.org. It's a little charity I run where we go to the outskirts of Skid Row, and from our car windows, we hand out basic human essentials like water, wipes, Coldstream cheese, socks, tarps, masks, t-shirts, things to keep people warm. So we just think that everyone deserves clean water, some protein, and a way to clean themselves, especially during Corona. We also hand out masks to those who really, really need it, who live in tents on the street, mainly the disabled and elderly who have a really hard time getting to services. And we do all of this with no agenda, just pure giving, no overhead. If you'd like to go to the website and donate, it's 100% tax deductible. And if you click on the donate button, you can go right to the $35 option and pick a signed autograph picture of either the Star Trek The Next Generation or Lower Decks, or Total Recall, where I played the three-breasted mutant hooker on Mars, and that's the X-rated version. Put in the comments section your address and anything you'd like me to write, and I'll personally inscribe it and mail it off to you immediately. And again, that's drivebydogooders.org. Captain Sonia Gomez, signing off.
We now return to Trek Untold.
So, Jeffrey, let's kind of focus a bit on the Star Trek stuff now, because, we just saw that box you have, which is filled with photos. So I'd like to kind of bring you, again, we're talking Secret Origins now. So how did you end up getting the gig to shoot Star Trek, and what was that very first Star Trek-related gig?
Patrick Stewart.
Oh, so it started with the captain right away.
Right off the bat, man. As I told you earlier about my childhood watching Star Trek, I was a Star Trek fan, and I watched Next Gen all the time. I had a little apartment at my studio, and I always was, in the evenings, I'd watch television off and on. And I knew the programming of the Next Gen show, so I always watched it. I loved it. It's just incredible writing and acting, as they all are. And when that shoot came in, I was already going down to Hollywood. Now, see, it's interesting how my career, I wasn't really pushing to go to Hollywood. In all honesty, I really wasn't. I was really content in San Francisco. And I still love that city and the whole area, the Bay Area. So when I started getting shoots to go down to LA, fortunately, they were hiring me for the kind of art photographer I kind of was and am. And that was Entertainment Weekly magazine, right? Rolling Stone a little bit. That was Leonard Cohen. And Entertainment Weekly started, little beknowns to me, were putting me in this place like he's going to be our West Coast photographer, right? Not Rolling Stone as much because they had their LA shooters down there, Matthew Ralston and Herb Ritz, and but Entertainment Weekly had this editor, Mary Dunn, and that's a weekly magazine. So she was overseeing every editor in that magazine. And I think there was like 8 of them. You had television, you had movies, you had novels, the list goes on, right? And she told them all, if we're going to do a shoot out there, you use Jeffrey, right? And that was great for me because it was a weekly magazine. And before I know it, man, I'm just up to my neck doing all these people, just shooting all these things. And I loved it. But Patrick was the first one, and that's how I got down there, and was through Entertainment Weekly. And it's not, it's not this portrait, right? But this one came right on the footsteps of I think they just were doing a spot on the first time I met Patrick. And then they had me go down shortly after and to do a cover of him after I did the interior shot, which was for a different issue. And man, that was great because I got to go to the Paramount set and hang out. I sat in the captain's chair.
You actually did it. Most people I've talked to, they're too afraid to go sit in that seat. I wouldn't do it, but you actually did it.
Oh man, the place was empty. We're in the set. It was my assistant and I, and it was the big black curtain, sparkling away with the fake stars, know. And we go over to the doorway. You can see where you pull it open, for that whole thing. And I'm like, Chris, I'm gonna go sit in the captain's chair. I think there's a photograph of me somewhere on that, but I went and I sat in the captain's chair, that was cool. And then, who comes walking in? Gates McFadden, right? Gates comes walking in and she's like, oh, like that, And I'm like, Gates, can I photograph you? Patrick's not here yet. Oh, okay. And she was great. Her and I clicked. And we did some great photographs with that curtain. She goes, man, I hope the studio doesn't get pissed off at me because I was wrapping her up in this curtain, with the stars moving around her and stuff like that.
I think that's one of the most important things I learned in my own world of photography is basically you do something until they tell you not to do it. And that kind of sounds like, that's what you're doing right there.
You got to keep going, man. And sometimes, I would leave shoots and, you probably have the same feeling. I'd leave a shoot and I'm like, damn it, I should have did that. It happens all the time, right?
Yep.
Oh, I should have done that. You just want to turn the car around and go get it again.
So at this time that you're taking all these photos, I'm kind of curious to know what your equipment was. And I assume back then, this is still film. This is still actual film, right? So can you tell me what your camera body was, what lenses you were typically using? What was the setup for you?
I was really into the save darkroom time in particular, and also for the aesthetic. And I'm going to grab this magazine again because we're even the print. The magazine and the print are shot on Polaroid film back then, right? It's a slide film. And they made that film for copy work, high contrast. That's why this image is so contrasty.
Okay. I was wondering about that.
Yeah, but see, I love that. I print like that in the dark room. But the tonalities that this film would give you when it went from the whites to the blacks, I just was always just incredible for me to see that. And it would drop the blacks out to where it was just pure black. I just love that, you know?
It's very,
And,
very much like a posterized effect on it.
Yeah. Also, you shoot the stuff, you know, pre-digital. Of course, now you just look at your back, digital. But back then, of course, you had a Polaroid. That's 90 seconds. But the other thing is that this was on 35 millimeter. So you didn't even have Polaroids. It's not going to give you anything close to this, but that stuff develops in 45 seconds, right? You put it in a little container, you go, and you whoop, out it comes, man. 45 seconds later. And actually, just to jump back to, that was how Tupac was, when he seen me do that on the first roll I shot with him, that guy went ballistic. I'm not kidding. I'm like, whoop. And that film came out, and I go, Pac, look at this. And it was all these double exposures I did with him, you know? And he just started dancing and hooting and hollering. He's like, man, you're shooting my next album. Just like that. I'm like, okay, you know, and I did, you know, but during those days, depending upon the shoot, if it was a shoot that I could be a little bit more aggressive with, like that cover, using polograph film and very contrasty imagery, I'd be shooting like a Canon T90, and I would probably have anything from a 24 millimeter on it to an 85 millimeter. I didn't own many lenses, and I still don't. I have more lenses now than I've ever owned for my digital cameras. My film cameras, though, I had a 24 millimeter, a 50 millimeter macro, and an 85 millimeter. That's all I had for almost 2 decades, you know. But my other favorite camera to shoot with during that whole time era was the Mamiya 6x7 Pro. And that's an amazing, you know, you got the bellow system, and of course you got the transparency. That's a 6x7, beautiful rendition. You know, that gives you that high-end commercial feel, you know. So yeah, it was the T90 and the Mamiya, but most of the Trek stuff. Well, can I go over here and get a magazine really quick?
Yeah, sure.
You know, the Trek issue, right? Which I shot. And let's just see what we can find in here. Okay. Avery Brooks, 35 millimeter T90 with polograph film, right? We jump over to here to Mark Leonard, Mamiya 6x7, double exposure, large format. And this was, Brent was the Canon T90 with, it was a Polaroid film, but it was the high contrast color copy film. And it actually has these lines in it. This was a multiple exposure I did with the Mamiya 6x7, 3 exposures on 1 piece of film. Gates here, that was, you can see the square. This was, I wonder if I had my, another system I used to carry around with me was the Veronica SQA, which I really liked. And the reason I liked the Veronica SQA is because it had a motor drive on it, so does the Mamiya. But I always instructed my assistants, this is probably going to nail this question for you. I always instructed my assistants to have different systems set up for me all around me, because it was film, right? You always had to load the damn back. If you're changing the lens, there's downtime. Even if it's 10 seconds of downtime, that's 10 seconds. Yep. You know, when you only got somebody in front of you for 15 minutes, and it's a lot like that. So I would have my 35, I might even have my 2 1/4, and I would have, let's say my primary was my Mamiya 6x7. I'd be shooting with that. Back's got to come off, another back's got to come off. I would just hand it over to my buddy Chris, my assistant at the time. He was with me for 10 years. Give it to Chris, and I'd pick up a 35 and keep shooting, even though it had different film stock in it. But I already knew the exposure differences and all that kind of stuff. So that was how I worked. I worked a lot like that.
Okay. And
that's one reason I have a lot of material on all these different people. I just didn't stop, you know, and I also used different lenses and film stocks. I tried never, you know, when I only shoot one film stock, I feel like I shortened the shoot somehow for the subject matter and myself. I didn't explore it enough,
Yeah, I think that's kind of like one of the fascinating parts of portrait photography is that, we're not talking about portraits as in when someone brings their baby to get baby photos. That's not what we're talking about. You're talking about, working with people who are moving around, they are performing for you. So it's very much, in spite of the fact that you're in a studio setup where, there's all this pre-planning that has to happen to make these shoots work, it's very much still about trying to get spontaneity out of the subject, right? So I'd like to hear a little bit about how you work with, in particular, the Star Trek actors to find that personality and find that spontaneity to get that personality to shine in a single photo.
Well, in trying to answer that question, it's like this shot of William Shatner. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
That is shot on a tripod with a Mamiya 6x7 system, and that's a triple exposure on one piece of film right here. Now, when I was doing this series, and I did this kind of look, this Star Trek, by the way, the Star Trek issue, you talk about being a little bit intimidated. Going back into earlier, these guys, one after another, these guys are coming into the studio. And I look over, I try not to look over, I look over and there's 8 of them sitting there from like 4 different shows. It's a trip, it's a trip. I mean, and then at the same time, just to veer off here a little bit, I have the magazine calling me during this montage of photography, of all these actors, and they're like, okay, you need to get William Shatner and Patrick Stewart together. I'm like, okay. I look over here at Patrick Stewart sitting over there and William sitting over there. They're not even talking. I mean, they don't want to talk. Don't ask me why. I didn't want to get into the psychological thing about it, but it was like, I'm instructed to try to get that shot, So I walk over to William. I'm like, man, how do you feel about, doing a portrait with Patrick? He's like, yeah, okay, great. Walk over to Patrick. Patrick, think about do a portrait with William. Oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm like, great. It's like, it didn't happen. But back to trying to manipulate people into a photograph. And sometimes it is a manipulation. And that's what I was trying to talk about right there.
Okay.
That one didn't happen, but you look at John here, they're all great people, and I had the camera set up, so I knew I was going to get a tight shot of his face. That was just one of many shots I got of John, but I knew that shot was going to be a tight shot. And I just tell him, I said, John, you're like this. I said, I need different facial expression. I need different gaze on your eyes, anything else you can come up with. And he brought up his finger and did that, and that's how that shot happened. Miss Nichols, now the shot on my website, I love of her, the one where she's dancing,
Yeah,
that
I was
shot.
gonna ask about that one. That's a great shot.
Oh, and that's how she came on set, right? And I'm like way back, big drop going out, I think I was in a psych, and she goes walking on set, and I go, dance. That's all I said, dance, like that. And I'm on a tripod, and she just starts going whoosh, just click, 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 click. Caught it. And then I had to get very studied with her because these were part of my other idea that I wanted to do with every actor on the Star Trek. It's like you can see the difference in my approach, right?
We're talking about the double exposure photos, right?
Yeah, well, these are all double exposures, but at the same time, these are very close-up double exposures where every actor, I kind of wanted to bring in the idea of space and time behind them, so I had these projections of galaxies and star clusters, and and then I would do a shot of her in silhouette. That's what's back here, and then I would place her within the silhouette because I knew it was black and I could do another exposure in there, right? And I would tell them what I was doing, and that is what, just so I don't forget to say this, but that is what nailed my cover of Leonard Nimoy for the book. You've seen that. Have you seen
for
that?
the I Am Spock book.
Yeah, here's a German version right there, right? He's a photographer. Leonard's a photographer.
Yep.
Was. And I remember turning back once in a while. He's just like, and that was why when I went up to talk to William, William goes to me, he goes, Leonard thinks you're really good, like that. And I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, he thinks you're really good. He goes, I can't wait to see my photographs that you take of me, like that. Being Jeffery Newbury back then, did I ever follow up on that? No.
Well, still, I mean, that's got to be an amazing compliment to hear, the guy you grew up watching on TV saying that you're a great photographer.
I didn't think of it that way, I mean, yeah, it is a great compliment. And once again, I feel privileged to have been through this, but I think the greatest compliment is when I actually get a call from fucking Leonard Nimoy, Jeffrey, and I'm up in San Francisco. I want you to shoot my cover of my autobiography. And I'm like, okay, and I fly down. That's after the whole Trek issue and everything. And I ended up working with Leonard, I think 3 different times. And I even went out to his Tahoe house one time to do some work with his wife and him. But when I was alone with Leonard, Spock, of course, they're actors. We all know that. But for us Trekkies, I'm a Trekkie, he's Spock, and that's like on my website now. I just put that up a couple months ago. I got the hand, I go, Leonard, can we shoot your hand? I know we're shooting your portrait for the cover. I said, man, I just want a photograph of the hand. And he's like, yeah. And I still remember focusing on that hand, thinking, this is like the best, I mean, for me, and it's just a damn hand, but it's like kind of climbing the mountaintop, and getting to a place that, and even though it's just a hand, it took a while to get to that point to make a photograph of that hand,
I mean, it's not just a hand though, it's the most important hand in the entire galaxy, let's face it.
100%, and always is going to be. Yeah.
And I want to come back to actually a few other photos you talked about, because when you started showing off the magazine, you actually pulled up the first photo you pulled up of Avery Brooks. That was like one of my favorite photos that I saw that you did, because Avery is, as Captain Sisko, he's like my favorite Starfleet captain. So that photo, just like you nailed his personality, you nailed so much about him, and what I feel, at least, or what I perceive as who he is. And same with like the shot of the double exposure shot of Brent Spiner, some of that work with Michael Dorn as well, and the work with Nichelle Nichols too. I mean, those are shots that really stand out. They have so much personality, but also so much truth to them also. And that's, not to get all artsy, but that is kind of what you're doing, is you're kind of trying to cut through the bullshit to find the truth of your subject.
Yeah, and luckily I am a Trek person too, I mean, and I understand the message of what Star Trek, I mean, we're all individuals, we all interpret it differently, but there is a message, I mean, Star Trek is probably one of the most progressive, well, we have Netflix and all, I mean, it's amazing the kind of programs that are going on right now, but Star Trek has always been, like a messenger of time and space, it's something beyond, and that's what we all love about it, right? But I appreciate that. And back to Avery, it kind of goes into my your question about how I would get them to allow me to photograph them, and even with Avery, they're such nice people. I always have to say that, because you always feel that, I mean, McDowell's a little bit of an ass.
I was going to ask about the McDowell photos too, because those photos, I love them. Yeah. The personalities, exactly. It's pretty amazing though, but he seemed like he's just kind of out there doing his own thing.
Yeah, he's just one of those guys, he's like, he's a Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit. There's
kind of a force of nature.
Few of them out. They just don't care, it's like, you get into tech. I'm just going to real quick, and who's the the CEO of Oracle again. I'm forgetting, but I've done a lot of these portraits in tech, right? And because after Hollywood, Silicon Valley was my next place. And, I get the call from the magazine, oh, you're going to go photograph so-and-so. He's the CEO of Oracle. And he goes, we just have to tell you that as soon as he hears that shutter click, he's gone. One click. Right. And I'm like, no, that's come on, cover shoot, set up, boom, 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 boom. Dude walks out. Poof. He's already walking away. One strobe hit. You put him in that genre too, of these, I don't care, I'm just you got the shot, right? Well, guess what? I did my research with this guy. This guy loved, and I'm not a sports person, so I'm going to be a little bit out of it. The San Jose Hawks or something like that. I think it was hockey, right? Whatever it is. And because I was reading some stuff about him, and as soon as he was walking off my set, I go, hey, don't you like blah, blah, blah? I was faking it, right? And he kind of like, yeah, you like that stuff? And then next thing I know, he's back on my set, and I shot 3 rolls of film.
And by the way, I totally interrupted your story too, because you're telling me about Avery Brooks. I totally want to hear that also. I want to make sure I don't forget about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, that particular shot, and you're right about that shot, because that's how I see him too, as a Starfleet captain. And I think that's maybe, I'm not sure, when I was, I'm down on the ground for that one. And that one's actually, that's a 24 millimeter lens, so it's a wide lens, and getting those hands that to me symbolize that power, that his character has such determination, and just like they all kind of do, Star Trek captains, but how he is, and that's why I did that photograph that way. But there's a lot of different stuff on him though, I can't wait to start expanding my galleries. I mean, I'm serious. It's like, can I go get something really quick?
Yeah, sure.
Do you're aware of my Star Trek poster, the Next Gen poster, right?
Which one?
Next Generation poster I did. No, I've only done one Next Generation poster. It's the group, the Next Generation cast. It's on my website, opens up the website, I think. It became a poster, and now it's an NFT, which I guess we're going to talk about. Anyway, so during that poster shoot, and that was the cover, that was the cover of Entertainment Weekly. It was a gatefold cover that went out with the cast. It was their very last photo shoot together because the show was ending. Shot that with an 8x10 view camera, because here I got 7 people in line. They wanted them all lined up. I'm not sure what that magazine is, but it was a gatefold, so it filled it out where they were all across the both pages,
Yep.
And I had to shoot an 8x10 on that because you can change the focus, but turned out fantastic. So then Patrick takes off. Everybody else stays behind because I asked them, and I've already photographed these people before, so they kind of knew who I was. And I said, hey man, I want to do some individual portraits of you guys, right? With an 8x10 view camera. So these are all contact sheets. These are all contact sheets with an 8x10 view camera,
Wow.
Say Brent Spiner. Yeah, and they just go on and on, and on. But every one of them do that. Gates McFadden. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. So you had some kind of master plan for these, I can tell.
Here's Michael Dorn. Here's Michael. I love these of Michael because, nobody hardly ever sees him out of costume, right?
Yeah.
He's just a character, man. He's just.
I hate to make you choose a favorite, but that is going to be the question here. Is if you had to choose one among these many iconic signature photos that you've taken of the Star Trek crew, what would be the one? Maybe let's not even say your favorite, but the one that means the most to you. Let's do that way. Maybe what's the one that means the most to you? That's most important for you. That you're most happy with.
Trying to get me in trouble. I might be going back to Hollywood, Well, let's put what was. I'm gonna kind of categorize this from my own self through your question. And it's kind of like me talking about the Spock's hand, you know, what it represented. Not only because of the hand, because of the symbol, you know. And Leonard, I did like really photographing him. Not that I don't like photographing all of them, but Leonard had a certain appreciation, and he didn't have to say it. It was this untold kind of communication about me being a photographer, right? Because he's a photographer. And we didn't even talk about that, but I could feel it. And I could see it in his eyes, you know? And that kind of gave a certain bond to him for me as one of the Star Trek actors. And then you jump over to Patrick Stewart. It's Patrick Stewart. And see how I say that? And I still feel that way about Patrick Stewart. He's probably one of the best actors on the planet, you know? One of them. There's a lot of them, you know, but he's one of the masters, you know, and just to photograph him, he's so photogenic, right? You can do almost anything with the guy and you're going to make a great photograph. You know, it's kind of like, and I have some pretty interesting photographs of him. You talk about behind the scenes, because I've worked with Patrick, I think 6 times over the years. You know, I had his home phone number. I've been to his house, you know. It's kind of like, Patrick, we got to do this photograph, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, I'm not at the studio. Come to my house. Okay. Go to his house.
Can't say no to that invitation.
Can you call Jackie, which is his assistant back? Can you call Jackie and see if she can get the back room of my office cleared up, so maybe we can do some shoots back there next? I go, okay, Jackie, can you goes, okay, yeah, okay, Jeffrey. You know, so here I got Patrick in his tennis shoes and his jeans. You know, he's not even Picard anymore, right? He's just this. It's interesting, you know, of taking people out of character, seeing people out of character. And Patrick is really one that is not really a Picard in my mind. I see him as Picard, and we all know him like that. But he just nails that character. He just, in reality, he's Patrick. The guy is just, he's kind of like George Clooney. He's a joker, you know. He doesn't reveal himself that much to the public because he keeps up that whole, you know, the star look, you know. That's always been an interesting thing with Hollywood for me. Anyway, what else?
So earlier in this interview, we mentioned that you are doing NFTs right now with these Star Trek photos. And I do want to ask you something about that, but I want to make a little bit of a preface first to my audience out there. Because I know and I understand there's a lot of Star Trek fans who are actually very much unhappy with the concept of NFTs. And even just recently, you know, when we're doing this interview, Star Trek Mission Chicago just happened, which is the big Chicago Star Trek convention. And there was an NFT booth there that was actually Paramount's NFT booth. And I was told, by all accounts, it was the most unpopular booth there. It was noisy. People hated it, and it barely made any money too. It was they had like a goal of certain monetary numbers.
I didn't make any money either.
Well, there you go. Yeah, but you know, basically, my question is, you know, well, first off, tell us a little bit about the NFT. Tell us where we can find these NFTs, but also kind of talk to us about, you know, why NFTs? Because, you know, for my money, I could tell you I'm still kind of on the fence about them as well. And I know if you did a book, like I'd buy a book in a heartbeat, but an NFT I'm unsure about. So let's just break this whole thing down.
Hey man, hey, I totally get your questions, and I was in that same place. And even though I have not sold an NFT yet, I do expect to, whether it's Star Trek or something else, because I believe the NFT world, the non-fungible token, especially in art, is just going to keep on going. You know, here you got the richest photographer ever now through the NFT world, right? He's passed up everybody. I forgot the guy's name, but because in all honesty, I'm not a big fan of his work. Don't get me wrong if he's listening to this, because he's done these twin series, which are really spectacular in themselves, you know. And he's just one of these iconic kind of situations that the guy just became a multimillionaire overnight, you know. Now, I chose, when I decided to do NFTs, and I'm doing more, I'm going to do more series of different shoots, because I want to give, not only do I want to sell my work, and I should back up after that statement so that you, the audience, can understand what I'm doing with my archives, is that I'm actually selling my archives. And pre-COVID was going very well for me. I sold Stephen Jobs, I sold Tupac Shakur, and I had another pending sale. And then COVID got that one. And COVID now, I'm just kind of seeing the light into the end of the tunnel. But with selling those shoots to very reputable buyers, doing something real with that photography. I mean, I'm serious, you know, and that's how I want my photography to be used, how I want it to be remembered, whatever, you know, the legacy. It's like NFT is becoming that for many artists that never had a gallery, never had a book, didn't even have a career, let's say. You know, the reason I ended up going with Star Trek for my first NFT launch on OpenSea, it's called Star Trek Editions, is because I felt it was almost too perfect for me. Here I have all this Star Trek material, and Star Trek for me represents, I've used it before, the terminology, time, space, infinity. Star Trek would not exist if it truly exists without technology. Technology is what makes Star Trek. You're not going to have that spacecraft going out to other galaxies and meeting other worlds and being beamed up. NFT is a beam up. I'm serious. That's what an NFT is. Here you got Captain Picard here 1 minute, beam me up. The next thing, he's over here on a spaceship. How did that happen? Technology. That's what an NFT is. It's technology. It's taken a physical image and taken it into the computer, into a system. Of course, we're all looking at it's a JPEG, but that's not really what it is. It's a digital entity now, right? And that digital entity can be that physical NFT can be owned by someone. And now it has, what do you call it? You resell it and the artist gets another 10%. And it keeps on going forever, right? That's why I liked my Star Trek becoming my first NFT. Does it make sense?
Yeah, and I will say, you know, there are definitely pros and cons to it, and I can understand why, especially, you know, I've seen a lot of photographers gravitate and a lot of other artists gravitate to NFTs, but, you know, it's on the other hand, when you see companies, big companies who are jumping on the bandwagon, that sort of becomes a questionable venture, in my opinion, more so than a singular artist like yourself doing that.
Yeah, no, I get that too, but what else is new, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
The corporate world is, you know, it's like I was talking to somebody over lunch yesterday about, because they of all things, they're like on T-Mobile, and they're like, you know, I'm going to change my cell plan. And what cell plan are you on? I'm saying, like, I'm on AT&T because I've had the first iPhone, and the first iPhone was AT&T, right? And I'm still on AT&T. They're like, you're on AT&T, you pay so much money, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's not cheap, you know. And it's like, yeah, I pay this much on T-Mobile, and they're like, you know, I'm going to jump over to this one. And I'm like, well, I think actually AT&T just bought T-Mobile. And they're like, no, they didn't. So I Googled it right at the table, you know, and yeah, they just bought T-Mobile for like, what was it? $22 billion, $22 billion, you know? And you think about, it brought me into the mindset of remembering one time talking with somebody else, and I think it actually was in LA, about how powerful these corporations are. You know, I mean, of course they're going to do an NFT, but it's kind of like, I remember the example this person was giving me. Goes like, you know, we're not going to go blow up Russia. You know why? I'm like, why? Because AT&T is going to step in and go, hey man, we have way too much billions of dollars of infrastructure, and you're not going to take over Russia. We're going to stop you. You know, and it's kind of like corporations have become governments almost. You know, they rule governments now. That's my answer to them jumping into an NFT. I know it's a long-winded one, but you know,
that's the truth.
And in all honesty, well, I think actually corporations will probably do some pretty interesting stuff with NFTs. NFT is such a new thing. You know, it's like the sky's the limit, and there's things that obviously none of us are going to even dream of about, except for the perfect dreamers, like an Elon Musk kind of person who totally embraces NFTs, of course, you know, and cyber money. That's where the true growth comes from. It's not from me throwing a damn photograph on there. You know, it's like it comes from the corporations, you know, and the big money.
So Jeffrey, as we're kind of coming to a close of this interview today here, you know, I like to ask my guests usually some career advice, but you know, I don't really want to get like beginner's advice in this case, because this is, you know, you're a professional, you've been doing this for many, many decades. So I think I want to kind of take this to the question of, you know, let's talk about a photographer who wants to make a leap from being an amateur photographer or being a young professional or just maybe even a serious hobbyist. And how do they take the steps to, I don't want to necessarily say get to where you are, but how do they take the steps to level themselves up and kind of turn their hobby into a profession and a successful profession?
Determination. You know, I mean, and I have a perfect example of that. My oldest daughter's half sister, who's an RN, has just started becoming a photographer, and she's good. And she's out in Providence, Rhode Island, and she's starting to do weddings now. She's starting to do portraits. Technology has shortened the curve for her, you know, because she can dial in an app and make it look sepia. She can, you know, all these kind of things, right? But I think that I can only go from my own personal experience of what I did and make that recommendation, which is you got to photograph every day. You hopefully you have a printer, because true photography to me is something that you hold, right? It's great having a computer. It's great producing galleries. And for me, being a film-based, educated photographer, when I look at a computer screen right now and see a photograph, it's more like looking at a transparency for me on a light table. That's how we see it, you know. It's not even a digital image. And I look and I shoot digital. I got all kinds of digital shit now, you know, but it's still not film. But digital has really been progressing, I mean, incredibly. But so I think that in truth, I mean, you can't get anywhere in any profession if you don't work your ass off. You might have good breaks, you know, and there are good breaks, but those breaks are only going to be there because you brought notice probably to yourself somehow, you know. So, I mean, the only way you can become a better photographer is by photographing more. That's the bottom line. It's the bottom line. And you look at your photography that you've done, and you think about it, you analyze it, you wonder why you did it, you wonder why it's successful, why does it look cool, why doesn't it look cool, whatever, you know. And you know, for me, photography has always been an exploration. It still is, you know. I just had my first grandchild, and I flew out to North Carolina to meet her. That was like about 2 months ago. She's only like 3 months old. So was only like 3 weeks old, I think. And my daughter, Ariel, she wanted me to photograph her. I was kind of 50-50 on it.
That's a very daunting task.
I brought my gear with me. I'm not going to do baby pictures, right? No, so here's what I did. And this comes from shooting my ass off for 40 years. Shooting digital, I took it, I set it up for 3 exposures later. You can see what I like to do with that anyway. Now, and I shot the way I would shoot Polograph. Polograph, even though it's a very high contrast film, when you start changing the exposure, whether you're doing it through the shutter or the light or whatever you're doing, it's like it starts to develop certain qualities that you never expect. And that's what I love about it, right? The digital world, you can do the same thing. And I'm finally getting a handle on that. So I set my camera up and she's laying there and I take the camera and I just kind of let it be there. I know it sounds strange. It's kind of like how I said there's a feeling when you're doing a portrait, right? I was looking for a feeling and I started clicking and I'm looking down at her and I knew that I had a wide angle lens on. And I knew I was doing multiple exposures. So I'm going ahead and twisting my camera and moving it around but I don't care about where these exposures land. I want the camera to show me where they land. I want to be, wow, look at that, right? And so I'm doing the dialing with different shutter speeds, slowing the shutter down, and the whole thing. I look at these files, maybe after about 2 minutes of doing it, and boom, there's the image. I mean, I'm not joking. It was just this most incredible multiple exposure image of how I was actually feeling about her when I first met her and first seen her, which was she was struggling in her infant body, right? She just became out of the womb and into the world. And you could see it in some infants, man. I mean, she was just like, what is going on? You know, really. And that's how that photograph came out. It had this quality about, she had two heads all of a sudden. And I mean, it was just all this stuff, you know, and it was like, that image for me was what nailed my experience with her, you know. Now, that's kind of an answer to that question, is that you have to be open. The camera is a tool, you know, but that tool, man, it can do a lot of things, and experimentation, I think, is, I don't even care if you want to do, you know, I went to school with a lot of people, you know, and some people are very, like Ansel Adams. I studied the zone system, you know, they're traditionalists, and there's nothing wrong with that. They want to make the most perfect tonal photograph of that, you know, whatever it might be. They just want it, a landscape or a park. It's got to be. I'm not like that. I'm just the opposite almost. Although I still consider doing that in my own realm, you know, but no matter what discipline in photography you're going to take and what interests you, you still should be experimenting, you know, in that discipline, that aesthetic that you've chosen, you know. And if you don't know what the aesthetic is, and many people don't, I mean, you got to find your style, your place, whatever, I don't know. But once again, that's only going to take feeling what your photographs are. I talk about feeling, it's the truth. I mean, for me, it's, you know, when you find an image that just, you're like, oh man, you know, and then the trick is to hold on to that place. Then you can keep continuing it.
So, you know, and Jeffrey, by the way, while we were doing this interview, I got an email from Entertainment Weekly because they knew I was talking to you, and they told me that they want you to now shoot the next photo shoot for the Star Trek Picard TV show. So what are you going to do? How would you shoot a modern Star Trek show?
I'd have to talk to the client and see what they want. Yeah. I mean, and then I would work from that. Within that context, you know, I mean, of course, I've done a lot of Star Trek, you know, but it's a different day now, you know, and it's kind of like I wouldn't be glued to what I've done before, unless they wanted me to do something that was maybe reminiscent to that, you know. But and then again, of course, it's just me. It's kind of like any photographer. You can have Avedon, who of course isn't alive right now, or say Dan Winters, or all these amazing photographers out there, and they already know kind of what I would know what I was going to do, but I would still bring in, I hope, what I explained to you, how I photographed my first granddaughter. A little bit of wonder, a little bit of experimentation, you know, letting something else come from that, you know, so that all of us can learn from it. I know this sounds kind of, I don't know, but that's kind of the way it is.
Although, you know, it would be kind of interesting to see how you would shoot Star Trek today, because I think most of the stuff you did for, you know, those magazines we just looked at were all, you know, traditional photo, 35 millimeter. This would be, you know, the first. Would this actually be the first time if this was to happen, would this actually be the very first time you ever shot a Star Trek crew with digital tools?
Yeah, yeah, it's all been filmed. Film still dictates how I shoot, even in the digital realm. And I think it's a big benefit for me to have a film base shooting digital. It's like I just, when I explained how I photographed my granddaughter, it's like everything, you can see things so quickly, and you kind of bounce off of it. You react to that too, and then you could manipulate things and change things very fast. That's the beauty for me about digital. Luckily, I've been shooting digital now since since .com. What was that, 1999? That's when it all changed. That's when all my clients in New York were wanting to get away with, they wanted to shoot digital. And I'm like, but I don't shoot digital. I have to learn Photoshop and go out and buy my first Canon D20. It's like, I shot Bill Gates with a D20.
Wow.
That was a very early digital shoot for me. I get a call to go up and photograph Bill, and I owned a D20, what was it, 7 megapixel,
A whopping 7 megapixels.
Yeah, well, luckily we have like Google Topaz now and all that good stuff. But you look at the cameras they were sending up to Venus, to those asteroids and stuff. I think they were like 2.5 megapixel. Now my cameras are like, my 35 is like what, 52 megapixel? I mean, it's just incredible, Well,
what matters most is not the megapixel, but the person behind the megapixel.
That's right. Hey man, it's like I said, shooting the iPhone last night. And have you seen Nick Knight's new work of his roses?
I have not yet. I gotta look them up.
Yeah, he shot it all with an iPhone during COVID. And I mean, the guy's like one of the most amazing photographers on the planet, but what he did with an iPhone shooting these roses, and then he brought it into Google Topaz to make prints as big as this window back there, astounding, beautiful images. Just, man, I look at them, gives me goosebumps, man. Just incredible,
So Jeffrey, last question for today. What is the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
That's a good question, and I'm happy to answer it. And I think that what really brought me into the Trek world, besides photographing it, was the Trek poster I talked about producing. That was back in '94 of the Next Generation cast. And I decided to go to Trek conventions with it, right? And I went to many to sell the poster. Working photographer, and I went out and I hung out with all the Trekkies, and there would be Gates might be there, or LeVar Burton might be there or something, but in truth, when I had people come up to buy that and they talked to me about, just like we're talking right now about Star Trek and about everything that is about Star Trek, and then they were buying this poster, and it things gelled together for me, the Star Trek world. You got to have the audience, you have us, and the industry that produces Star Trek, I mean, it's an industry, it's a monster machine. It's just truly incredible, but when it comes down to, it's like you listen to musicians talk. Well, we can't do anything without selling a record, and the listener is why we do it, and it's the same way, but so when I did that poster though, and it brought me into meeting a lot of Trekkies, it was great. It was like, I felt connected then, I still do. I hope this even brings more connection. I really do, because I've been alone here for 2 years up here in the mountainside in COVID. It's like, it gets lonely.
I mean, it's a great view. I'm just waiting for like the Gorn to pop out from behind you or something and just throw a rock at your window.
Well, man, it's herds of deer come through here every day. Herds of javelina. You know what a javelina is?
I javelina not.
Look it up. It's your own species. It looks like a cross between a giant rodent to a giant pig, but it's a javelina.
I gotta look that
there's tons. Yeah, you got to. It's an incredible thing. They're here every day. I see all that stuff. The Sonoran Desert is just spectacular. I think we're up almost at 3,000 feet here. So that took some getting used to.
I'm sure.
Took me about 3 months about like, why am I feeling so weird? But
So for folks who have been enjoying the video version of this podcast, they've been seeing a lot of the photos on screen as we talk about them. But if you're listening to the audio version, or if you do just want to see a whole lot more of Jeffrey's work, go to his website at jeffrey.newbury.com. We're going to have links for that, of course, in the show notes. And Jeffrey, just one more time also, what is the website for your NFTs?
it's OpenSea. The website's OpenSea, which is a NFT site. You would search for Star Trek editions. That's the gallery or I forget. They have all these different terminologies on these sites that I'm still getting a handle on, but that's basically the gallery within the Ocean Sea NFT site. And there's many sites right now that are just popping up, but that's the one I'm with right now. See how that goes. Yeah, go take a look at it, man. I'd love to get some feedback on it. I know that some of it might seem pricey, but it's an investment. That's how I see it. And I know from my past sales that weren't NFTs. I'm not trying to make a sales pitch. It's just that I had to come up with a price somewhere, and the way the NFT works now, resell is such a big thing in them. You get one guy, a collector, buying it. Next thing you know, it's been sold 10 times in 2 months. It's the way they work.
So yeah, if you're interested in the Star Trek NFTs, then go ahead. You guys know where to check them out now. Jeffrey, it's been really wonderful talking to you today. And, we talked about how you kind of find those moments with your subjects, and it's easy to see how you're able to connect with them because, just talking to you today, I just feel so open and easy to chat with you about anything, really. So, thank you for the wonderful work you've done on Star Trek and all, especially for dropping
I can be your psychologist.
So thank you for all your work with Star Trek clients, and thank you also for just giving us all of your photo knowledge today. Very much appreciated. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you. We'll talk again.
That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold, and thank you for checking it out. One more time, if you're not following us on social media, please do so by checking us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Trek Untold. And that's all one word, no spaces, on any of those platforms. If you want to check out the video version of this podcast to see our guests, head over to youtube.com/nerdnewstoday, where I post the video version of this show every Sunday after the initial episode airs on Thursdays. Shout out to our sponsor, Triple Fiction Productions, who create 3D printed toys and prop replicas inspired by Star Trek. Their items come in all shapes and all sizes and are always amazing. If you're in a position to financially support Trek Untold, please consider heading over to patreon.com/trekuntold to become one of our Patreon supporters. There's a lot of cool perks that you can get by becoming a Patreon supporter, including early access to the episodes, the ability to ask our guests questions, and a lot more cool stuff coming very soon. Please consider leaving a rating and review on iTunes or any other audio platforms that you listen to the show on that allow you to do so. Or if you're one of our YouTube audience members, please make sure you comment on this video and give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Until next time, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz. This has been Trek Untold, and remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the Rageworks Podcasting Network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.